Okay, hi, I'm Brian, and today we're going to talk about intelligence-driven operations and kind of sort of define what that actually means and how to actually effectively leverage threat intelligence. To give a little background about myself, I spent about a decade at NASA previously in the Security Operations Center in a variety of different roles, starting from real-time analyst to doing threat intelligence for the agency and eventually becoming the ops manager for the SOC. I only lasted about 11 months doing the ops manager role since apparently people are really hard to manage. I wish somebody had just set me aside at the time and told me, like the technology side, security side, that's probably pretty easy, but the people, that's where you're gonna have challenges. Nobody bothered to tell me that. I now go around telling everybody this because being a manager, again, very difficult. For some reason at the time, my guys were really into their chairs, very specific about their butt imprints and their specific stains. Literally had a room full of chairs, but I had way too many arguments just about chairs. So because of that work out there, most of my work in research is operations focused. It just killed me at the time to be sitting in the SOC and getting all kinds of different reports about threat intel and all these adversaries out there and all this evil, and realizing that half the reports I was reading are not actionable. I was basically just being told there are bad things happening, good luck. And eventually at some point your leadership also reads the same articles and they start asking you, so what are you guys doing about this? And you basically say, I don't know, stuff. Best effort. I learned that was the magic catchphrase for that one. Other areas of focus for my work at the time was nation-state-based adversaries, primarily because we were NASA. You could probably guess which nation state in particular was the one that was really interested in that work. They have a lot of very similar looking technology. Well, yeah, you can take a guess at that. Okay, so anyway, that's my background. That's where I'm coming from. Our team name, Unit 42, comes from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy because we know 42 is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. Before that, we're the PaloAlto Network's Threat Intelligence Team. That is a huge mouthful. You try to make it into acronym, it's not great. You can work that out for yourselves. And we decided we needed a cool name, just like everybody else, and we love the concept of 42. For those of you that are not familiar with this sci-fi trilogy that is actually 6 books, I don't know why they call it a trilogy, there's a small story in there about an extraterrestrial race of aliens that decide they need to find the answer to life, the universe, and everything. So they create a supercomputer called Deep Thought, and after about 10,000 years, it comes back with the answer 42, which begs the question, what is the question? Anyway, it's life, the universe, and everything. Anyway, we're Unit 42. Our mission is fairly simple. We want to make the world a safer place. So for those of you that have never heard of Unit 42, as I mentioned, we do threat intelligence for PaloAlto Networks, but our sole mission is to take interesting threat research and make it freely and publicly accessible to anybody out in the universe. As long as you have internet access, you can get to our blog. You can see all of our research. We don't redact anything. All the indicators are right there, all the context for you to read and to understand the adversaries. At the time when we created this team, this was a little controversial because obviously our company is for profit and we were basically saying, hey, we're just going to give away stuff. We also had other vendors that were looking at us like, hey, what are you guys doing? You're giving away stuff that we're selling for a lot of money. And you also had the intelligence community who sort of had pitchforks and torches in their hands saying, hey, you're burning all of this really great intelligence, with the old idea that, if you publish on adversaries and you kind of show your hand that they're going to change their tactics, they're going to become undetectable, and we have to start back at square one. It turns out for that one, adversaries generally don't care. Even if you publish constantly about different types of infrastructure they're using and different types of tools, and basically saying, hey, this is what they do from A to B. For the most part, unless it stops working, unless as a whole, as a security community, we stop actually allowing this to happen, they will just keep using the same stuff. Because at the end of the day, every single adversary out there is still a human being, just like us. And what are humans? Lazy or efficient, depending on how you want to look at it. And these guys are all going after low-hanging fruit and basically putting as low effort as possible to try to accomplish their mission, whether that's financially motivated or espionage motivated. Why would they bother creating new exploits or new malware or new ingress points or new cool stuff? Because they're not trying to stunt or anything. They're really just trying to get their job done. For a lot of these adversaries on the, say, state-sponsored side, they're mostly just kind of going into work, looking at their ticketing queue, just like any of us, and saying, all right, go attack company X, country Y. and you're just like, oh man, I just want to get my day over with, so I'm going to see what worked for Jim over there yesterday. Okay, use that delivery document with these tools. All right, probably going to use that too. I'm going to recraft it a little bit. I need some infrastructure set up, so I'm going to send a ticket to my infrastructure team like, hey guys, can you register a new domain for me? And those guys are also efficient, we'll use that. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, well, we'll register a new domain, use some new whois information, but maybe they're lazy and they're copy and pasting and they just paste one additional artifact that they reused yesterday because, it's gonna work anyway. So now ticket comes back and that adversary goes, all right, I've got my infrastructure, I retooled my thing so it's slightly different, and now I'm just gonna go send it off and we'll see if it works. And I'm just gonna try to get my ticketing queue clear, just like all of us going to our jobs. Okay. So that's Unit 42 in a nutshell. Now let's talk about those intelligence-driven operations. But before we really get into how that might work out, we need to first talk about the attack lifecycle. So most of you are probably fairly familiar with the concept of the attack lifecycle. Lockheed calls it the kill chain, but I believe they copyrighted it, so I can't actually write this down anywhere. Everybody has sort of a different way of expressing this too. Mine has 7 steps, you can kind of see that. Some people have like 9 steps, 12 steps, 3 steps, some have loops and stuff, and some are circles and pyramids. Mine's just a line. So basically this is a 7-step process where we can map pretty much every single attack to it and understand that every adversary has to go through these processes for an attack to fully be successful. There are some variations out there where maybe some steps are skipped or just not involved. The most common example is not using a command and control. So when you have, say, an automated piece of malware that's a part of an attack, then maybe the operator doesn't actually have to talk back and forth to it. But for the most part, these steps absolutely have to be accomplished for any attack to succeed. Now, if you look at this too, though, on a defensive perspective, you're like, oh, cool, I have all these opportunities to stop this attack. Unfortunately, that's not the way most of security folks think. We just kind of think in binary terms. Did I get owned? Did I not get owned? And the reality is, it's a little more complicated than that. So if we walk through this, I'll give some examples of what each stage might look like. So the first stage of recon, every single attack starts with recon. There has to be some amount of data collection first. Everything from financially motivated adversaries to espionage-based adversaries, you have to understand, the adversary has to understand how they're actually getting this targeting data. A lot of it is just simple things like Google dorking. This is a search that says file type, XLS, in URL attendees. If you do this search right now, you will find a bunch of really fascinating documents with all kinds of contact information. So if you are a HR person, marketing person, this totally makes sense. Yeah, it's just a random document, has contact information. What's the harm? If you're an adversary, you're like, this is amazing. I have so much data to target somebody with. Beyond that, we think about things like social media. I mean, people are just really not good at setting privacy settings on their social media. I have doxed so many criminals this way because they just are lazy. But you can find just a plethora of targeting information for any adversary. So that's sort of more of a targeted adversary. But if you're talking more about a criminal that just targets the universe, even for them, they still have to figure out how are they going to get this stuff, or who are they actually going to send this stuff to. And for them, that might be as simple as just finding a list of IPs on Pastebin, or even just a list of email addresses. Maybe that's 1 million email addresses, but regardless, there is some amount of reconnaissance done. This file in particular kind of looks like this, so this is kind of wavy, but in any case, just a basically Excel file full of attendees, got company name, phone numbers, email, name. So if you're the adversary and you just want to make a phishing email, now it's simple. I just craft a little one, I have the email address already, half my work is already done. So after the recon portion, we have to now weaponize something, or the adversary has to weaponize. And a lot of the time, it's going to be a weaponized document. This is one of the most common ways. This is actually a legitimate document from a nation-state adversary. If you look at it, you're like, okay, it seems like an email list, seems legitimate, because it is a legitimate document. It is a document that was publicly available that the adversary then pulled down and weaponized it by putting an exploit inside it. What that may look like is like this. Try not to blink, because you might miss this. So I'm the user, I'm going to open this doc file because I need to click on everything, and something just happened, but now I get my document. So if you guys blinked, you may have missed that portion of Word crashing. That was the actual exploit of a vulnerability. But now the user gets their decoy document, and they're like, yeah, okay, I got my content. Nothing to report here, nothing to see. But in that 5 seconds, I've now just exploited Word and dropped a backdoor on there, and it's also going to be set to persistence to run every single time. That one was actually, so I discovered this in 2016. The vulnerability that this thing exploited was 2012-0158. It's a classic. Everybody loves using this. But think about that. That's from 2012. So this is 4 years later. This is still incredibly widespread because, again, it still works. Until the day we actually manage to patch all of these legacy systems and outdated versions of Word and stuff, they're still going to use this old crap. The exploit for this particular vulnerability, it's completely out there. It's just open sourced. I mean, if anybody wanted to build this document out here right now, you could go on YouTube and pretty much just search how to exploit 2012-0158. You'll see a 2-minute video on how to do that. Super easy to do. And this is, again, what we consider a so-called APT, which I don't use anymore because really none of them are really that advanced. They are persistent, though. They are more PTs than APTs. So the next step in our attack lifecycle, here's the delivery. This is an example of an actual email of that document. So this is a spoofed email. It looks super legitimate. There's 2 files attached to it. One of them is actually benign. They are both legitimate files, but they were both publicly accessible, but they attached one of them, the doc file, as an exploit document. The other one is just a benign document, just an actual one. So if you're, again, the victim, you're like, okay, I mean, this looks legitimate. I expect communications from this person. They also stole that person's signature block, so it looks solely legitimate. But this is really one of the most basic ways and also the most common ways that malware ends up into systems. There's sort of this weird phenomena where people sort of assume that malware and stuff just magically appears on endpoints. That is completely not true. There has to be some amount of ingress there, whether that's via spear phishing, it was manually put there, a USB stick. They don't just magically appear. And the most common way still to this day is just phishing. I've heard the success rate for most phishing attacks is somewhere around 19%. And after talking to a lot of different customers and whatnot that have done their own tests, it is accurate, about 19 to 20%. I don't know if you guys have also done similar tests, but that's probably what you'll get to. And let's think about that for a second. If you send out 100 phishing emails, let's say for credentials, I want credentials. Sent out 100 out, we assume a 19% success rate. I now have 19 sets of credentials, and I only need 1. So now maybe I pocket those 18, I use that one to maybe do some more credential harvesting or whatever I want, and maybe that gets remediated, but wait, I have 18 more credentials in my pocket that nobody knows about yet. So I'm just gonna start reusing those. So phishing, still super successful, but we can do a lot to even prevent it as well. I mean, for this example, this email spoofed. I mean, why allow spoofed email? You should inspect the header and make sure it's coming from where it says it is. There's a couple of attachments here. One is definitely a malicious document. You can inspect for that. There's a lot of stuff you can do here. So the next step after our delivery is our exploitation phase. And this is where the actual exploitation of generally a human will occur. Now, obviously, we have software exploitation like we saw previously. In this example, this is a separate adversary that used a macro document instead. And macro documents are just everywhere at this point, right? Everybody uses them. Criminals, nation-state adversary. I just recently published some research where the Sophisy Group, also known as APT28, Fancy Bear, Pawnstorm, SAR Team, Strontium, they have so many AKAs. In any case, they're also using macros, because why not? Again, you go on YouTube, you download Metasploit, you can get an obfuscated macro doc in a couple of minutes. Really easy to do, and it's actually pretty undetectable because it's so obfuscated. So in this example here, we've got an email. It's a fish. You guys can't read the body, but I'll read it for you. So this email literally just says the subject line of important. Okay, so people feel important, like, all right, I'm an important person. The body says, hello, dear colleague. Please find the file attached. It's very important. Again, very important, emphasizing that. Looking forward to your reply, thank you. There's also a note underneath that says, don't open in the browser, download the file and open in due to incomparability of Excel version. And if you see the incomparability message, please click on enable content in pictured. Thank you. This is not sophisticated at all. However, this is, again, a potentially state-sponsored adversary. So it's got typos everywhere. It's not super targeted. I mean, you would hope that your average user would see this and be like, this is probably not legitimate, but we all know that our users, they all like to feel important. I mean, I like to feel important too, so if I see this, yes, I'm an important person. I see 2 files attached to it. One says important.xls, one says how.png. So what's the first thing I do as a user? I open everything because I like clicking. Everybody likes clicking. So I'm going to open this important.xls because I am an important person. I'm going to open hollow.png because I need to just open all the files, make sure what they are. This is a really handy file though. It tells me I need to click on this enable content button. There's a big red box and an arrow there. I'm like, yes, I think I know where I see that button. Oh yeah, it's right here in the Excel file. So I'm going to click on that and nothing happened. So if I'm a user, I'm like, oh, what's going on? Is Excel just acting, oh, now I got an error. So what's your user do at this point? Are they filing a ticket with security? No, of course not. At best, maybe they file a ticket with support saying, hey, I tried to open this document 8 times and it's just not working. I keep getting this weird error message. Now, if you're a security guy and you get that ticket, you're basically like, oh my God, you tried so hard to own yourself. But that's cool, that's fine. That we failed, right? As security folks, we actually failed there because we exposed them to this type of attack and allowed them to really be committed to clicking on buttons. So after that, what that macro did was just drop a backdoor onto that system, and we enter the installation phase, where we maintain some sort of persistence as the adversary. There are attacks where this phase is sort of skipped, where you may see attacks that are not persistent, so they only exist in that specific session. But for by and large, most attacks will have some amount of persistence on there. So here's some examples of persistence. There's Windows service examples, there's scheduled tasks, registry keys, Windows startup. There's just various ways that adversaries can essentially do things to Windows to say this should always run. This bottom example is actually one of the most interesting ones I've seen. So this was used by APT28 or Sophosy or whatever you got, the Russians. I'm just going to call them the Russians. So back in 2016, we saw them having this attack campaign where they're using these RTF files with Flash files embedded inside them. Already at the time, you're like, okay, who's doing that? Like, who actually embeds Flash objects inside RTF? So I went and tried to find that answer because I thought that was an easy win, right? I could just publish this information saying, hey, block any file with Flash objects in them. It turns out a lot of people embed Flash objects inside their Word documents, which was mind-boggling to me because I have literally never thought to myself, you know what would really make this RTF file? A Flash object. That's really going to complete it. That has never crossed my mind. I don't know if that's crossed your guys' mind, but I don't know. Apparently it has definitely worked for some people though. So in this instance there, what they had done is they found a POC back in 2014 where a researcher had done some investigation in Microsoft Office and learned that there's a special registry key that you can write where it will then do a performance test for any value that you give it. Okay, so at the time we were thinking like, wow, this is brilliant, right? Because you could basically call any file afterwards, and every single time any Word or any Office application runs, it will run that file to do a performance test. It will execute that file. So already you're like, okay, this is a pretty good persistence method. What's even better is that initial registry key, after it's written, Word or Excel or whatever has to open again, which makes this basically undetectable in any sort of sandbox too, because no sandbox reopens Word or Excel or whatnot. So this persistence mechanism was fascinating and was incredibly effective. Weird thing about that attack too though, if you didn't have Flash, because the Flash object inside that Word document was an exploit kit, if you did not have Flash installed onto your system, that attack just failed completely because it had to leverage Flash. But unfortunately, Flash is still very prevalent in most of our environments. Okay, so after installation, we've basically got we did some recon, we weaponized the document, we sent it out via some phishing, we exploited a human or some software vulnerability, we installed something. The next step would be command and control. And command and control is basically the act of the malware or the tool talking back to a command and control server where the operator then can basically send back commands. So it's going back and forth. This is an example where we found some DNS tunneling. So DNS tunneling is kind of an interesting thing. So they're basically transferring data via DNS lookups. And this is sort of what this looked like. The actual domain itself is kernel.ws, but the structure of this DNS lookup looks like this. So that far box over there where it goes from 1, 2, 3, etc., that is the structure of the DNS lookup that the command and control handler should combine them into some sort of data. The data itself is base64 encoded inside the subdomain. So if we decode that, it is just some recon information about the target system. So basically saying, I have landed on this victim, here's some information about it, here's the username, here's what directory I'm in, here's the version number of the Windows system, what else do you want me to do? And at this point, for this particular backdoor, it's fully featured, so the operator could run arbitrary commands, they could download files, they can upload files, they can take screenshots, keylog, pretty much do whatever they want. And it was all over DNS tunneling, which is interesting because it's a lot harder to detect that versus say what's more common like this, like a HTTP command control. So this is just plain text, it's in base 64, but nothing too fancy about it. If you look at the URL string, it looks like it's going to a PDF file. It's not actually a PDF file. There's some base 64 after it. If you decode this, it's also just basically a running list of processes on that system, some disk information, some system OS information. So this is a lot easier to detect, right? Because this is going to some random domain. It's just plain text HTTP. There's also this kind of weird phenomenon now where most legitimate sites actually use SSL encryption. So if you've got this boatload of data, of traffic going back and forth from your users to external, and most of it's encrypted, and all of a sudden you get this single GET or POST request it's over plain text to some random domain, it's probably malware. You've probably been compromised. So after command and control, we move into our action objective. So this is where now the bad guys do something. They've delivered documents, they've established a beachhead, they can run arbitrary commands, and at this point they, really depending on their motivation, they can do whatever they want. And sometimes it's something like this, which is destruction. This is an example of what we call the Shamoon 2 attack. This was the follow-up to the first Shamoon attack back in 2012. You guys may or may not be familiar with it, but back in 2012, Saudi Aramco was hit by the first instance of what we noticed as a worm that was a wiper as well. So this went around and wiped out about 30,000 systems. Incredibly simple, but incredibly effective too. It had a bunch of hard-coded credentials in there, so the adversary had already done a lot of recon and credential harvesting, so they put admin credentials in there. They leveraged internal Windows tools, so things like PSExec to actually send itself and run arbitrary commands within the network. The actual wiper driver, this is kind of funny, instead of actually making anything because they're lazy, they literally just downloaded a shareware wiper tool and embedded it inside. The license expired back in 2012. In 2016, they came back with the exact same tool and the exact same configuration, still expiring in 2012. So you're like, oh man, this thing's not going to work, right? So they added a command to change every single victim's system date to 2012. Yeah, it still worked. It was incredible. So, super simple attack, but again, incredibly effective. With Aramco, with their 30,000 systems that was wiped, they had to go back to pen and paper and fax machines. The Sony attack was pretty much a facsimile of that attack, in fact. And again, back in 2016, they came back again, but hit more like a dozen systems. So what that may look like, you basically get a shutdown message. You're like, oh, okay, Windows shutting down for some reason. But, Windows does that. So that's not a big concern. I go, okay, it's shutting down. If I'm a user, I'm like, okay, whatever. And then if I'm on the server, I'm like, oh, this is shutting down too. Okay, well, Windows does that, I guess, sometimes. So I'm like, okay, that's fine. Maybe it'll reboot. I'm just sitting around like, okay, all right. So now it says Windows loading files. Like, that's a little different. But I see this loading bar in my XP system. I'm like, okay, that's fine. It's just rebooting. I got to update or something. But then I look at my server all of a sudden, and it's telling me I need to reset it up. I'm like, oh, that's not good. Then I go back to my desktop system, and it says operating system not found. Well, okay, so that's pretty bad. That's just one example of, however, what actions on objectives may look like. More often, if we're talking about like a criminal with, say, like a ransomware campaign, this is going to be where they encrypt your data now and ask you for money. With a coin miner campaign, this is where they're now silently using your CPU cycles to literally print money out. Also a fascinating discussion. I would love to discuss the coin miner stuff with any of you guys if you're interested in it afterwards. For most espionage-based adversaries outside of this type of destruction, generally it's more leverage or data stealing or just really kind of hanging out there. A lot of these guys will just establish beachheads and then just disappear for a while, letting it run in the background, and maybe a month later when they have an actual operation, they come back and do something. So now we've talked through the attack lifecycle. We've understood what steps the adversary actually has to do to accomplish anything. I sat around one day and started wondering, why aren't we doing this on the defensive side? Can we map defense? Because we spend a lot of time talking about the adversary, what all their behaviors are, all their tactics, their techniques, their tooling, and we think about how we can stop that at every stage. But do we ever take a step back and wonder, can we map a process on how we actually establish security operations? Can we actually do that? So I sat around like, okay, I think we can. In fact, what if we just turn the attack lifecycle upside down and try to map it to each stage of that, right? It makes sense. So I came up with this. I call it DAM with 2 N's, which stands for Defense Automation Mapping for Ninjas and Noobs. That was the best name I could come up with. I'm really bad at naming things. If you guys have ever read my research, I give things the stupidest names possible. I have some highlights. I recently named a piece of malware Oopsie, $3. What else do I have? Clay Slide. I actually don't know why it's even called Clay Slide. Like, that just doesn't even make any sense to me. But all these names are on the wild now, so I can't even take them back. That's just what we refer them to. Any case, I basically flipped that attack lifecycle upside down, and I've condensed one of the steps together. So the exploit installation phase, I condensed that down to operationalize phase. But essentially, we're mirroring that attack lifecycle, but in a security operation focus. So starting with an assessment, or really recon about ourselves. So a lot of organizations just sort of neglect this. We just start thinking, oh, we need to secure stuff, so we're just going to buy things, we're just going to start plugging things in, we're going to do prevention and IPS and IDS and proxies and all this cool stuff, but we don't actually think about, do we even really need this stuff? So the first step, very first step for everybody, do not pass go, do not collect $200, get a network map. I cannot stress this enough, get a network map. If you do not currently have a network map, go make one, go get one, go strangle someone for one, it doesn't matter. You have to get a network map. You can only defend what you can see. When I was at NASA, I never got a network map. I literally bothered the NOC director, because we're separate, like many security organizations, between the SOC and the NOC, literally every day. Can I have a network map? The guy would be like, yeah, I'm still working on it. I'm like, you've been working here for 50 years. You obviously know where things are. I'm like, oh, I don't know. So I left the agency. Then about a year later after I left, I was speaking to one of my former colleagues, and he's like, hey, remember that guy you used to bother all the time? He's dead. Literally took the network map to the grave. Just would not give it to me. Now, it also made me think maybe he just didn't really know, or maybe he was embarrassed. I don't know. Either way, he must have known something to just write it down, just give it to me, so then I can actually effectively defend the network, right? So you have to get a network map. Understand where things are. Understand where you can put your defenses. Part of that, number 2, is to understand your organizational environment. Again, something that gets neglected a lot, because it's like, is it really security? It's more like IT, asset management. But if you understand what your environment actually looks like, now you can really effectively put in proper security controls to automatically stop preventing a lot of this stupidity, to be honest. So for example, if you have a largely Mac environment, let's say you're like 99% Mac, do you really care about Windows threats all that much? Maybe not. So maybe you can set some policies for that, and you can block every single Windows file type. If you are largely a Windows environment, you probably don't care about Mac stuff too much. Most likely you're a mixed environment, but then you can start identifying based on your network map where things are, and now put in the proper security controls. So on your Windows area, maybe you can start implementing some file blocking. In your Linux area, maybe you do some additional stuff with privilege escalation. Point is, you have to understand your environment. This will allow you to identify your potential risks so that you can better implement security policies. So I drew a simple network map, simple 4-zone. So we've got external firewall, DMZ, internal firewall, business LAN, data center. This is pretty common, fairly simple, very flat, right? You only have 2 firewalls, external, internal. You're not really doing much. And right off the bat, if you have this network map, let's say it's more complicated, or maybe it's the same, you can immediately start identifying, okay, maybe these are some places I can start putting things, or maybe I can start implementing things. And this allows us to go into that architect phase, or on the adversary side, be the weaponization phase. So the first thing first for architecture is that we have to design around the business, however. It is super easy as security professionals to just say, you know what, block everything. Screw everybody else, we're just gonna secure everything, lock things out, and nobody can do anything. Then obviously your leadership and the business side goes, hold on a second. We need to enable our users to do their work. Otherwise, they're just gonna find ways around it. Now you got like that hidden IT, all that kind of junk. You also have to understand what your organization's goals are. Is it a preventative posture? Is it a reactive posture? For me, I would say today most people should probably go into preventative posture just because there's so much low-hanging fruit out there that's so easy to block. But perhaps your organization wants to be more reactive. Perhaps you have a huge IR team and they need a bunch of work to do. I don't know. But there's a lot of different reasons to select a proper posture for that. So if we were to re-architect that single network map that I just drew up, let's do some stuff here. Maybe I can put another firewall, do some segmentation between my data center and my business LAN. It's a pretty good first step. Maybe I can do some file blocking at the perimeter. Don't allow executables anymore. I mean, is there really a great reason to allow executables to be downloaded or even emailed? I mean, for the most part, most users are now just doing their work in a browser anyway. What are they actually installing? Even if they do need to install stuff, is it sanctioned? Probably not. Is it malware? Maybe. So if you can do this type of file blocking, but again, going back to understanding your environment, you can start implementing some of these controls here, and you're basically reducing your attack surface every time you do something like this. Maybe I enable also multi-factor authentication in my segment, so that if I do want to go into my data center and do stuff, I require multi-factor authentication. Again, very simple security policies, but this is the type of stuff we can easily do if we've already done the work to create a network map and understand where everything is. And then lastly, all right, I've done all these security policies and controls and stuff. That seems really effective. Now I want some visibility. So maybe I send all that data into a log aggregator. Okay, so now I've architected something fairly interesting here. I've got some simple security policies that I know will help prevent some of these dumb attacks. I've got some visibility. I feel pretty good now. So then I have to actually deploy it. And this is where also a lot of people get stuck, unfortunately, because you have this great plan, you've got this great write-up, and you take it to your NOC or you take it to your leadership and you're like, hey, I have this really great plan, we're gonna do it. And then all of a sudden like, oh, well, that's gonna be a fiscal year 2020 project. And you're like, damn it. Or maybe, I don't think we have the budget for it. So it does get challenging, but it's super pivotal here now to have a really great plan on how you're going to present this, but also partner with those different groups that are pivotal to you actually deploying this. So you're having to work with your NOC. I know, it's hard. I did not have a good relationship with my NOC. I wish I did. But taking those guys out for beers and hanging out, being buddies, going with your IT team as well, because they are also pivotal to this, and having that sort of multifaceted attack into your leadership or your decision makers to say, hey, look, we've got this really great plan. We're working together as an organization. Let's go implement it. And then finally actually having to execute that design. So it's not just about talking and creating documentation. You actually have to go and do it. And one of the ways to do this is unfortunately a Gantt chart, where you just enumerate all the different tasks you have to do. But once you write this stuff down, all of a sudden it becomes a little more tangible than just, hey, let's go put some firewalls out there and we'll segment, do multi-factor. It's really easy to say all that. When you actually write it down and put some timelines and assign it to different groups, now it sort of becomes more of a real thing. So let's assume we've actually deployed this thing. The next step is now where we get fancy. We need to operationalize it. So it's good that we've already understand what our network looks like. We've put in some automated controls. I mean, this is going fantastic right now. I'm already getting rid of all this junk out here. I feel good. But now we can really get cool about this. We can start automating some of this stuff. We can look at some of those workflows, see what's actually coming in, start trying to create some things. And most importantly, to also now, this is the time to start hiring some really great people. So one of the things that I've started observing is, so I work for a vendor, and I want everyone to buy more stuff. However, with that said, throwing money at a problem does not solve it, especially when it comes to security. Obviously, it's way easier just to spend a whole bunch of money, buy all kinds of equipment, plug it in, and go, yay, it's working. Silver bullet, right? Because that's what all the marketing teams say. But that's not the truth. You have to have this balance of manpower as well as technologies to really effectively do security. So I'll give you some examples of potential workflows you might do. So you have this great network, you've architected it, you've put in some basic controls already. Let's do some more stuff. So maybe I'm blocking all portable executables now. Just because I've done an assessment, I've learned that I have a primarily Mac environment, I just don't need portable executables. Let's block all of those. I've also identified that there's really no good reason for macroed Word documents. Now this is weird, right? So macroed Excel documents, very common. A lot of finance, if not every financing department loves their macroed Excel documents. You cannot pry it from their cold, dead hands. However, macro Word documents, I've always asked, who's actually using macro Word documents? Yeah, so some people are. And for you guys, you may have to be a little more granular in your rules, right? So maybe instead of blocking them outright, maybe you block them from external to internal. So internal, totally okay. Lots of business use for that. But if you're getting unknown macros from an external source that you've never heard of, do you really need to allow it? For some people, yes, because I need to see everything. I'm like, all right, well, can't help you there. But for other people, maybe that's something that you can start talking about. Maybe we can do stuff about authentication, not just allowing everything to be brute force. There are so many OWA instances out there that are just not rate limited. You can just basically hammer on them all day. And eventually, at some point, I'm going to figure out that someone is using the password, because that's an 8-character password, and a lot of organizations still only require 8 characters. No complexity, just password. So you can start doing rate limiting stuff. Maybe that creates a ticket or that causes that account to be disabled. Maybe instead of just that type of stuff, I'm looking at multi-factor. So maybe if I get 4 multi-factor failures within 2 minutes, I'm going to lock that account out, or I'm going to create an incident ticket that I need to go investigate what may have happened. Maybe that tells me that user's credentials are already harvested, or maybe they just lost their token. I don't know. Either way, you can start automating a lot of this stuff. Maybe if you find Mimikatz, so Mimikatz is a fairly well-known password recovery tool. It's not actually used for password recovery. Just bad guys use it. It's open source though. It's on GitHub. If you guys want to play with it, it's pretty awesome. Actually, it's fully featured. Gets used a lot in post-exploitation actions where they basically need to escalate privileges, so they'll try to extract admin credentials. But if you find this on your network, that should trigger some automation, because there is basically zero business use for anybody to have Mimikatz. Even I don't need Mimikatz, and I mess around with malware and stuff all day. There's just no need for me to have it. So if you're finding this coming across your network, whether that's on your perimeter or internally or in your sandbox or whatever, that should easily trigger a ticket, the system getting taken offline, the user account getting locked out, whatever. But the point is, there has to be some sort of automation done here. These are all easy wins, but can be incredibly effective at just identifying threats, identifying potential compromise, and also preventing these threats. Okay, so now we've gotten pretty cool. We got some workflows, we got some cool architecture. Next step after that now is actual data collection. So we've talked a lot about internal stuff. And the point is, you have to do this internal stuff before even getting into threat intelligence or hunting. If you don't have any of this stuff done, the network map, the architecture, implementing security controls, then you really shouldn't be seriously talking about threat hunting yet, because you still have a lot of work to do ahead of you. And if you are kind of already talking about threat intel, you really need to take a step back and understand, do you actually know what your network looks like? Do you actually know what adversaries are coming after you? Probably don't. And again, you're just kind of stabbing in the dark and hoping that things work. So in this data collection portion, assuming we've done all this stuff now, we can now start identifying, all right, based off the data that we're collecting now, based off our really cool architecture, who is actually attacking us? What kind of data can I collect about the adversary? What kind of tools are they using? Can I identify their infrastructure? And that's probably going to be in a SIM or some log aggregator, something like that. A lot of it is also going to be from external sources, such as our beautiful blog. I'm not a fan of design, to be honest with you. It should be darker, but in any case. A lot of it is going to be reading blogs, ingesting threat intel feeds. But because you've already laid the groundwork to do all this really interesting intel about your own organization, everything you collect is going to be a lot more relevant to what you are actually, what your actual risk is, versus just, saying, okay, there's just a bunch of bad stuff out there, I just got to block all of it. And that's just not effective. It's not an effective use of your time, and it's just way too labor intensive. Finally, with all that done now, we've done a lot of grunt work. It's very unsexy. Nobody wants to do it, but you have to do it. Once we've done all that, now we can start finding evil and be victorious. We now have that great balance of automation and manual analysis. For if you've done all these security policies and controls and architected and segmented and put multi-factor, all that stuff, honestly, you're probably not seeing about 99% of the stupid stuff out there. All the ransomware, coin miner, banking trojan, all that stuff, you're probably not seeing anymore because you're now blocking it. So now you are spending your actual time hunting down really interesting, potentially highly impactful, that 1% of threats that maybe your automation just can't fine because the adversaries realize, man, this network is super hard to get into, so I need to start switching up my tactics. And now you're forcing them to actually do something different. You're forcing them to commit resources. You're forcing them to develop new things. And can they actually do it? Maybe. Maybe they have the resources to actually develop something, but probably they are just going to be like, oh man, this is too hard. I'm just going to move on to my next target. At which point you have now claimed victory. One of the best tools to use this is our own tool called Autofocus. It's the only tool you ever hear anybody from my team talk about because it was made for us. When I first joined the team, I saw this tool. We didn't even sell it yet. I was like, this is fantastic. I've spent years trying to make Splunk do very similar things where you're just sending logs and have context and threat intel feeds and just like one single pane of glass. I failed at it. Apparently being a Splunk developer is a real job. You get paid a lot of money for it, and I was not one. So this tool is fantastic, and that does something very similar in terms of looking at all the malware that's coming across your own network, and we go through this entire database. So there's about 4 billion raw samples in there, and we look for basically behaviors that are common across malware families or adversaries and try to tag all of these. Our goal literally is to tag every single one of those, 100% coverage, so that if anybody puts in any artifact regarding a piece of malware or adversary, and that could be everything from process activity, mutexes, DNS lookups, session ID, usernames, whatever, you can immediately tell, okay, this is adversary X, it's malware Y, these are their motivations. Now my response is very different from if I just thought, okay, this is good or bad. That's really not a great way to do business. You have to have that context. Okay, do I have time for questions? Yes? Okay, any questions? If anybody has any. Okay, no questions? Cool. Well, I'll be around if you guys just want to chat one-on-one. We can talk about coin miner stuff because it's fascinating to me, or whatever other questions you have. All right, thank you all very much.